In 1945, when the smoke of the Second World War finally cleared, humanity woke up to a world irrevocably broken and remade. The old empires of Europe, once the masters of the globe, lay in ruins, their power and prestige consumed by the fires of conflict. From this global wreckage, a new map of power was drawn, stark and simple in its terrifying clarity. It was a bipolar world, dominated by two colossal superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union. These were not just nations, they were ideologies, two opposing visions for the future of mankind, locked in a struggle that would define the next half-century. On one side, the democratic capitalist West, led by a triumphant America, its homeland untouched by the devastation of war. On the other, the communist East, a vast empire of nations bound to the will of Moscow. For nearly 50 years, this precarious balance held the world in a state of suspended animation. It was an era of proxy wars fought in the jungles and deserts of distant lands, of nuclear arsenals capable of ending civilization in an afternoon, and of an iron curtain that cleaved a continent in two. The world was frozen, caught in the gravitational pull of these two giants. But today, that world is gone. The rigid certainties of the Cold War have evaporated, consigned to the pages of history. The fall of the Berlin Wall and the collapse of the Soviet Union didn't just end a conflict, they shattered the very foundation of the global order. For a brief, fleeting moment, it seemed as if history itself had reached its conclusion. The United States stood alone, the undisputed hyperpower in a unipolar world. Its economic model, its cultural influence, and its military might were unparalleled. It was the dawn of a new American century, a time when the defining questions of global governance seemed settled. The path forward appeared clear, a steady march of globalization, free markets, and liberal democracy, all under the watchful eye of Washington. The great game, it was thought, was over. America had won. But history is not a straight line. It is a cycle of rise and fall, of order and chaos. While the West celebrated its victory, new forces were stirring, gathering strength in the shadows of the unipolar moment. A new order is now rising from the East, not as a single challenger, but as a complex, three-way clash of civilizations and interests. The United States, the established power, now finds itself contending with two giants who are re-emerging onto the world stage. China, an ancient civilization returning to what it sees as its rightful place at the center of global affairs, its economic might now challenging the very architecture of the American-led system. And India, a democratic behemoth, the world's most populous nation, charting its own independent course, refusing to be a pawn in anyone else's game. This is not a simple replay of the Cold War. It is a far more intricate and unpredictable contest, a tripolar struggle for influence in the 21st century. As these new titans rise, the old players are being redefined. Russia, the heir to the Soviet legacy, is a power in relative decline. Its vast nuclear arsenal remains, a ghost of its former superpower status, but its economic and demographic foundations are eroding, forcing it into the role of a junior partner, a spoiler rather than a shaper of the new order. Europe, a collective economic giant, remains a strategic dwarf, wrestling with internal divisions and its place in a world no longer centered on the Atlantic. Its prosperity is undeniable, but its geopolitical will is uncertain, and in the great expanse of the global South, in Africa, Latin America, and Southeast Asia, a profound awakening is underway. For the first time in centuries, these nations are no longer passive objects of great power competition. They are active subjects, demanding a voice, leveraging their demographic weight, their resources, and their growing economic importance to claim a seat at the table. They are building new alliances, forging new trade routes, and creating a world that is not just multipolar, but truly global. This is the story of the Great Realignment. It is the story of how the unipolar moment ended and why America's supremacy is no longer guaranteed. But this is not a prelude to a new world war. The battlefields of this century are not trenches and landing beaches. They are supply chains, semiconductor foundries, and the digital infrastructure that underpins our modern lives. The weapons are not missiles and tanks, but tariffs, trade deals, and technological standards. The grand prize is not territorial conquest, but influence over the global operating system. This is the story of how power has shifted, why the old rules no longer apply, and how the intricate, high-stakes game of diplomacy, not war, is redrawing the map of the world before our very eyes. How does a nation become a superpower? Is it through deliberate conquest, a masterfully executed grand strategy spanning centuries? Or can it happen by a twist of fate, a sudden, violent shift in the global order that leaves one nation standing while all others have fallen? For the United States, the answer is both. Most historians agree. The US became a superpower by accident, and then, with breathtaking speed, by design. To understand the world we live in today, we must first return to the moment the old world burned, and a new one was forged in its ashes. The Second World War was an act of continental self-destruction. For 6 brutal years, the great powers of Europe, the centuries-old masters of the globe, tore each other apart. Their cities were reduced to rubble, their industries obliterated, their treasuries emptied, and an entire generation of their people lost. When the guns finally fell silent in 1945, Europe was a ghost of its former self, a continent of ruins and refugees, its colonial empires beginning to crumble. But across the Atlantic, a different story had unfolded. When Europe destroyed itself, America emerged not just untouched, but transformed. Spared the devastation of war on its homeland, the United States had become the arsenal of democracy, its industrial might supercharged by the demands of global conflict. By the war's end, America was responsible for half of the world's entire manufacturing output. Its factories, unscathed and operating at peak capacity, churned out everything from cars to radios to the very steel beams needed to rebuild the world it would soon lead. Its economy was not just booming, it was a colossus, dwarfing every other nation on Earth. This economic dominance was backed by unprecedented military force. The US Navy was larger than all other navies combined. Its Air Force commanded the skies, and for a brief, terrifying, and politically decisive period, it held a monopoly on the most destructive weapon ever created, the atomic bomb. Its military was utterly unmatched, giving Washington leverage that no empire in history had ever possessed. And then came the masterstroke of design. In 1944, even before the war was over, delegates from 44 Allied nations met at Bretton Woods, New Hampshire. There, they architected a new global financial system. With Europe's economies in tatters, the US dollar, backed by the world's largest gold reserves, was the only currency stable enough to anchor the system. And so, its currency was crowned king of global trade. The dollar became the world's reserve currency, the bedrock of international finance, a position of immense power it continues to hold to this day. This confluence of an untouched homeland, a dominant economy, an unrivaled military, and a supreme currency created a paradigm shift. Geopolitical scholars like John Lewis Gaddis describe this moment as the time when history tilted toward Washington. Power had not just shifted, it had consolidated in a single capital. But America was not alone in its superpower status. The Soviet Union, though ravaged by the war, emerged with military and ideological might of its own, controlling a vast swath of Eastern Europe. For the next 50 years, the world was divided between these two giants, a bipolar order defined by the Cold War. From the heart of Europe to the newly independent nations of Asia and Africa, the globe became a chessboard. This was the great contest between capitalism and communism, democracy and authoritarianism, forcing nations to choose a side. Your allegiance determined your allies, your enemies, and your economic destiny. This was the world America built, a world it dominated. But this bipolar era, which seemed so permanent, was destined to end, giving way to a brief, illusory moment of absolute American power before the rise of new challengers would change the game once more. In the final, frigid days of December 1991, an empire that had defined the 20th century simply ceased to exist. The Soviet Union, a superpower forged in revolution and hardened by war, dissolved not with a bang, but with the quiet lowering of a flag. The iconic red banner with its hammer and sickle, a symbol of global ideological struggle for over 70 years, was brought down from the Kremlin for the last time. In its place, the Russian tricolor was raised, marking the end of an era. The Cold War, the defining conflict that had held the world in a state of suspended animation for nearly half a century, was definitively over. 15 new nations emerged from the wreckage, each charting its own uncertain course. For the West, it was a moment of profound, almost unimaginable triumph. This seismic shift gave rise to a powerful idea, articulated by political scientist Francis Fukuyama. The world, he argued, had reached the end of history. This wasn't a claim that events would cease, but that the great ideological battles that had driven human progress and conflict were now settled. Liberal democracy, paired with free market capitalism, had proven itself the final and most successful form of human government. There were no more viable alternatives. The grand narrative of history, a relentless contest between communism, fascism, and democracy, had reached its conclusion. The future, it seemed, would be one of gradual, peaceful convergence toward this Western model. With its sole rival vanquished, Washington emerged as the unchecked hegemon of a unipolar world. For the first time since the Roman Empire, a single power possessed such overwhelming military, economic, and cultural dominance that it had no peer competitor. This was America's unipolar moment. Its military budget dwarfed the rest of the world's combined. Its culture, from Hollywood films to fast food chains, was a global export. Its political system was the undisputed template for progress. The United States was no longer just the leader of the free world. It was, for all intents and purposes, the operating system for the entire planet. This new reality was swiftly consolidated. NATO, a military alliance created to contain the Soviet threat, didn't dissolve. Instead, it expanded, pushing eastward into the former domain of the Warsaw Pact, absorbing old adversaries into Washington's security architecture. Economically, the US dollar's reign as the world's reserve currency became absolute, granting America immense financial leverage. And a new wave of globalization, powered by American technology and championed by American institutions like the World Bank and IMF, began to knit the world together in an intricate web of trade, finance, and communication. This system, built on American rules and secured by American power, promised unprecedented prosperity and peace. It was the dawn of the Pax Americana. But beneath the calm surface of this unipolar order, in the shadow of America's triumph, the seeds of the next global contest were already being sown. While the West celebrated the end of history, another ancient power, long dormant, was quietly harnessing the forces of globalization for its own purposes. It was studying the new rules, mastering the game, and patiently building its strength, waiting for its own moment to return to the world stage. The end of history was, in fact, just the end of a chapter. A new challenger was rising. The post-World War II world is over. The unipolar world is over. And the Cold War is over. What rises now is a world where no nation can rule alone, and every nation wants a seat at the table. This is the new global power struggle. Subscribe to Seminal Affairs for deep cinematic explainers on world power and geopolitics.